Good morning. Good morning to everyone. Those who don't know me, I'm Adrian Smith, and I'm currently the president of the Royal Society. And on behalf of the Society, a warm welcome to everyone, particularly our American colleagues. As many of you are aware, the US-UK Scientific Forum is the main annual scientific meeting between our two academies, established over 15 years ago, with the very broad objective of bringing together scientific leaders and other key stakeholders from both countries to address the most critical issues of the day. In the last few years, the forum has covered a wide range of topics at the intersection of science and society. Most recently, topics include the researchers' access to data, bringing nature into decision-making, energy storage, sustainable agriculture, so a very wide range of topics. The meetings also serve to further strengthen the broad and deep relationships we have between the Royal Society and the National Academy of Sciences, and have acted as a springboard for further collaboration on these and other issues. So the topic of this year's forum, Science in the Age of AI, could hardly be more pressing and relevant. AI is one of the most interesting stories of our age, I guess. Its extraordinary capabilities and the rapid technological development which underpin it are radically impacting all aspects of society in many ways. Of course, it starts off with scientific research, but then it's sort of turned on its head. What will it do to impact on scientific research? So this forum is the latest in a series of exercises seeking to demonstrate and explore the revolutionary potential of AI for scientific discovery, whilst at the same time highlighting the potential risks associated with this rapid upheaval. So at the end of last month, and I think it's on your table there, the Royal Society published a report on the same topic as this forum, which explores how AI is transforming the nature and methods of scientific research. And just before our report, President Biden's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, PCAST, published its own landmark study, Supercharging Research, Harnessing AI to Meet Global Challenges. Covers similar territory and looks at how AI might most efficiently and responsibly be deployed to address these challenges. So we're delighted. I think we have 4 members of PCAST with us at this forum. So we'll be hearing a lot more about these studies and the extraordinary scientific advances they seek to capture over the next days, as well as the opportunities and challenges that this potential transformation brings about. So we hope that through these discussions we can build collaborations for future research and also help to guide a path to the safest, most responsible and productive uses of AI that might best harness its potential for one of the missions of the Royal Society, the use of science for the benefit of humanity. And given the many potential misuses, of course, of AI, not least as both of our countries face crucial elections this year, the stakes could not be higher. So can I thank the co-chairs, Alison Noble and Bill Press, and the organising committee for all the hard work in putting together this programme. And can I thank our colleagues at NES, in particular Anna Bashkirova, Jennifer Clements and Ken Fulton for all their inputs. So a brief summary after all this will be produced and published and shared with participants. So I, and I hope you, look forward to the discussions over the next couple of days and wish the meeting a great success. And with that, I'll hand over to Alison.
Thank you, Adrian. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Alison Noble. I'm one of the Foreign Secretaries at the Royal Society. And as one of the 2 forum co-chairs, I'm delighted to open this year's forum. We have a very exciting programme over the next 2 days, covering a wide range of topics that span various aspects of the extraordinary impact AI is having on science and the potential and future impact it may have. And I look forward to discussing with you how we can realise this potential in the safest and most equitable manner possible. So to the 2 days. Today's plan, we will shortly start with an overview of the current state of AI and how it is integrated into scientific research. We will then look at a series of case studies showcasing the capabilities of AI across a number of disciplines from astronomy to weather forecasting, and look at how these are enabling new types of science and scientific advances. Tomorrow, we will look more closely at the implications of AI for open science, reproducibility, and privacy. We will briefly present the findings of the two Royal Society and PCAST reports on AI and science that Adrian mentioned. And finally, we will close by considering how we will best ensure that AI in science is used responsibly and ethically in order to maximise the benefits of AI-enabled science for the benefit of humanity. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my fellow members of the organising committee, my NAS co-chair, Bill Press, Andy Cooper, David Donahoe, Chris Holmes, Francesca Rossi and Tapio Schneider for all their hard work over the last few months, the many Zoom calls in putting together this outstanding programme and lining up such an outstanding group of speakers. It has been a pleasure to work with you all. Finally, to people who are present in the room, a gentle reminder to please speak into the microphones provided when needed, as the meeting is being live streamed, and that's also a welcome to the people who are online. I'm very much looking forward to the discussions over the next 2 days, and now I would like to hand over to Bill to say a few words. Thank you.
I'm Bill Press. I have the privilege of having been appointed by the NAS Council to be their representative as co-chair of this meeting from the US side. I have very little to add to what Alison and Sir Adrian have said. I will point out the very explicit goal of the organizing committee to organize a very eclectic meeting in several different dimensions. So I think we're hoping that you'll find a range of people here from AI discovery to AI applications, a range of people here across fields, including the physical sciences and the life sciences, and mathematics and engineering and so forth. And then maybe a little less obvious, some attempt to have a range of people across career stages, since it's probably going to be the earlier or middle career stage people who make the real advances in the subject of why we're here today. In other words, I think we're looking for all cross-pollination across many dimensions. After each session, magically, numbers will come in on the tables, and there'll be, on the back of those numbers, it'll say what table you're assigned to if you don't already know, and there'll be little group discussions in smaller groups. I think the staff of the academies will explain to us how we're supposed to do that. But I look forward to a very interesting 2 days, and I hope you all do too. Thank you. Someone has to say, and now. And now, I hope that Andy Cooper is here, yes, good, for his opening remarks, and he will chair the first session.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Excited to be chairing this first session. So I'm mostly going to just introduce the speakers, but I thought before I did that, I'd say a little bit about who I am and what I do. My name is Andy Cooper. If I haven't met you, I'm at the University of Liverpool. I'm a chemist, but we're working on applications of AI and computational chemistry as well. So this is our lab, or one of our labs. So one of the things we've been doing is building robots which can carry out research autonomously. So this is what we called the mobile robotic chemist. It uses, I don't know if I call it AI in the first instance, but it uses algorithms to search chemical space. And we're now trying to push this in the direction where these systems become smarter and really do use what you would call artificial intelligence. Also computational chemistry, so my colleague Graham Day, who's here today from the University of Southampton, we are trying to build in crystal structure prediction such that this robot can think about what the chemistry as well as search the space. And we're also doing some work in the area that some people refer to as human in the loop, which is how do we better capture chemical knowledge or scientific knowledge from humans as opposed to relying overly on AI. So I think for many chemistry problems that's going to turn out to be the more powerful approach, actually, at least in the short term, to fuse AI with human knowledge directly and robots. I should say there are other people on the program today who are working in this space. Professor Christine Persson from Berkeley is speaking in the next session, who's interested in computational chemistry mixed in with robotic methods, and Professor Kim Jelfs from Imperial College in the same session talking about computational chemistry again in the context of automation. So there'll be some other talks today in this field. And just one shameless plug, Kim and I are leading a new hub called Alchemy, AI for Chemistry. This is an EPSRC hub and started just the beginning of this year. We have 5 years of funding. It's co-led by myself and Kim, but there are a whole bunch of people involved, as you can see on the slide there, and I'm hoping that we might find some new collaborators for this hub today, because this is a UK hub. We very much are looking to broaden this out from the original investigator team. We're going to have some funding calls as well later in the year for projects in the hub. So I hope we'll get a chance to talk about that. If you're interested, please talk to myself or Kim. So that's my little plug. I will now introduce the speakers. I won't give a very long introduction because these are in the booklet, but the first talk will be given by Jeanette Wing, who's the Executive Vice President for Research and Professor of Computer Science at Columbia University. She's going to talk about AI in science, and we had a Zoom call about the content of her talk. It's going to set the tone, I believe. It sounds very exciting. The second talk is by Frank Nguyen, who is the Partner Research Manager for Microsoft Research, and I was speaking to Frank last night. He's going to tell us, I think, how we can abandon density functional theory. Maybe I'm slightly oversimplifying there, but again, should be very interesting subject matter. The third speaker, I think, is not here yet. Pushmeet Kohli, Vice President of Research for Google DeepMind. I'm moderately confident he will show up, but he's not here yet. But assuming that he does turn up imminently, he's going to talk about accelerating science with AI. He's also involved in AI safety and is involved in the Responsible AI Working Group, as it says there. If he doesn't turn up, we'll skip forward, I guess. And the final talk, this first session, is Tom Mitchell, who's the founder's university professor at Carnegie Mellon University, where there's actually quite a broad research base in AI. I know some people there working on the chemistry side too, so it's an interesting place, I know. And he's going to talk about something quite different, which is the future of human learning science in the context of AI. So this is the schedule again. We're on a reasonably tight schedule. I guess I'll stand up if people start to overrun. But currently we are 5 minutes ahead of time, so I think we'll make use of that. And if Jeanette, are you ready? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeanette Wing, and I'm going to talk about AI and science. My talk has 3 parts: a compressed history of AI, a simplified view of transformer models which underlie large generative AI, and a bird's eye view of how AI can benefit science. So I think my talk is going to actually give an overview of the 2 days. So let's start with the AI timeline. In 1950, Alan Turing, considered the father of modern computer science, proposed the Turing test. If a human interacts with a machine and the human cannot tell the difference between interacting with the machine and interacting with another human being, then the machine passes the Turing test. We could thus consider this machine as exhibiting, in some sense, human intelligence. 1956 marks not just when the term artificial intelligence was born, but the start of AI as an academic pursuit. At a summer conference held at Dartmouth, the participants asked whether we could build a machine that mimics the behavior of humans. This grand goal of AI was recognized early on as way too difficult to achieve, and thus subfields of AI splintered off, representing subtasks of human intelligence: computer vision for vision, speech recognition and natural language processing for language, robotics for mobility and manipulation. The first wave of AI during the last half of the last century is signified by representing knowledge symbolically, not numerically, and representing reasoning by rules. For example, if Socrates is a man, then with this rule I can conclude Socrates is immortal. These rule-based methods led to what are sometimes called expert systems, which by the late 90s found their way into scientific domains. The first expert system, Dendral, captured knowledge about organic chemistry and let chemists identify unknown organic molecules by analyzing their mass spectra. The second wave in AI hit by the end of the last century, and we are still riding it. The second wave is distinct from the first in that it is driven by the plethora of digital data, especially data that represents human behavior. For example, what our movie preferences are, when or how we commute to work every day, and what groceries we buy. By 2012, deep neural networks showed how with big data and with big compute, machines could perform certain tasks as well as or better than humans. For example, with this deep neural network, suppose it were trained to classify images. Then if I feed it a picture, this picture, that it has never seen before, it will output that it's a cat. More precisely, it might tell me with high probability, say 0.99, that it's a cat, and with a lower probability, it's something else like a tiger. Fast forward 10 years, and we are now in the age of generative AI, where we can generate new data, for example, text that has never been written before, or images that have never been created before. Here, the large language model, GPT-4, is generating a proof requiring knowledge of calculus to a simplification of a problem statement that appeared in the 2022 International Mathematics Olympiad. In the second example, a diffusion model is used to generate new images of a dog that are similar to the original dog picture. It does so by first adding noise to the original picture and then denoising it to get a brand new image. To put science in the context of this AI timeline, by the 1980s, supercomputers became the workhorse of science. For example, performing enormous numerical calculations and running simulations of physics-based models. The explosion of scientific data generated by devices and instruments that make observations and take measurements enabled the age of data-driven science. At about the same time, statistical machine learning pulled together the splintered subfields of AI, bringing vision, language, and robotics closer to each other, and even teasing us about the eventuality of artificial general intelligence. For science, the real breakthrough came in 2018 with AlphaFold, an AI system built on both deep learning and reinforcement learning that could predict protein structure. And you will hear a lot about AlphaFold later in today's sessions. It's the convergence of big compute big data, and advanced AI that I think provides a context of this two-day event. In the past 10 years, the second wave has turned into a tsunami. Here we see a 3.4-month doubling in the past 10 years in computational power, measured in petaflops per day, used to create machine learning models. Note the y-axis here is a log scale. And in contrast, the 2-year doubling of Moore's law looks like the lower part of this curve. And here we see a 2.2 times growth rate in training data size. In just the past 4 years, we have gone from talking about billions of words to trillions. So how can scientists ride this tsunami? It's worth understanding a few basic concepts underlying generative AI, which are remarkable for generating text and images. For example, to generate text, if I feed a large language model a sequence of words, then the LLM will predict the next word. That is all it does. It will produce the word with the highest probability of occurring next. So, for example, if I feed in the input sequence, the cute dog begged for it will output bone, assuming no other word has a higher associated probability. And as I mentioned earlier, I can generate new images using not just LLMs, but diffusion models. What is fundamental to both of these techniques is that the underlying probability distributions are learned from billions of examples and represented as deep neural networks. So in the next 4 slides, what I want to do is sketch out the transformer architecture, which is shared by state-of-the-art large language models. The transformer architecture has 2 steps, and both steps build on DNNs. In the first step, through a series of transformations, we encode the input into a multidimensional embedding space. The manifold hypothesis states that real-world high-dimensional data lie on low-dimensional manifolds embedded in high-dimensional space. Thus, you can imagine each transformer via linear and nonlinear operations stretches and squashes manifolds in this space, passing the transform manifold onto the next layer. We don't know if the manifold hypothesis is true, but minimally it provides us good intuition as to what happens at each layer. The result of this step is that each input word is embedded in this space. Now, embeddings are ways for us to represent symbolic information numerically. Here, each word gets represented as a vector of floating point numbers, each of which represents some feature of the word. It's a way to convert high-dimensional data into low-dimensional space. What's interesting about this embedding space is that both distance and direction have meaning. Hence, you hear the term vector embeddings. From this embedding, we can learn abstract concepts, not explicitly represented. For example, king is to queen, as man is to woman, represents the abstract concept of gender. Walking is to walk, as swimming is to swim, represents verb tense. In the second step, we decode the input sequence of words in the embedding space and eventually output the word with the highest probability of occurring next. But unlike DNNs of the past, critical to the success of this architecture, we also add in between each transformer layer attention layers, which I will explain shortly. In any case, we finally output the word bone, which is then appended to the previous output tokens and used as input for the next iteration. And this is how ChatGPT works. Attention layers provide context for the words being processed. Context constrains the possibilities. Each node provides key information about itself to others. For example, I'm a noun. And each node can query for information from its neighbors. For example, I need a color. This context can help us resolve ambiguity in language. For example, Winograd schema, which are considered mini Turing tests, are easily solvable by large language models, and thus makes it seem as if LLMs can do common sense reasoning. Here, it's ambiguous whether it refers to trophy or suitcase. We would know how to resolve it if we know whether the last word is large or small, which might be in the context of a longer input sequence. Part 3. Let me take a step back from AI and talk about how science can benefit from AI. So generative AI can help scientists generate synthetic data, generate simulations, and more interestingly, generate new hypotheses. The novelty of these new hypotheses is that because the computer has access to an enormous amount of data, it can find patterns or correlations that would never occur to a human. AI can help us identify and discover. We can classify and predict objects, recognize and discover new patterns, and detect anomalies or rare events. AI can help us design and optimize experiments by helping us determine what control parameters to try for the next experiment, for example, on a large, expensive instrument. It could even propose new experiments for us to run. And it's a given that AI can pore through scientific literature, summarizing results and creating compelling visualizations. All of these techniques are agnostic as to what field of science you work in, so it has the potential to expedite cross-disciplinary work. And there is a multitude of diverse sources of data to train and test new AI models for science. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of discussion later on many sciences, including astronomy, but I thought I would just share how AI has already been helping make discoveries in astronomy and material science. Astronomers use DNNs to recognize galaxies and now can classify galaxies with an accuracy of 98%. Astronomers used AI to detect new exoplanets, predict signatures of new types of gravitational waves, and find a unique object that may be a remnant of two black holes merging. And astronomers used generative AI to produce a sharper image of the very first image of a black hole. In material science, the design space is huge. A short polymer with 100 amino acids has on the order of 10 to the 130 designs, more than the number of atoms in the universe. Material scientists are using generative AI to create new material designs. This is one example of a never-before-seen design of a hierarchical mycelium-based composite. Material scientists are also exploring how to use AI to identify new equations and algorithms, to synthesize complex novel proteins that don't exist in nature, to visualize complex systems, and to predict how a new material will behave. Looking ahead, already the scientific community is exploring how to build foundational models for their scientific domains, which can later be fine-tuned to a specific problem. For example, Shirley Ho of the Flatiron Institute is leading the Polymathic AI Initiative, an international and multidisciplinary team of collaborators, including experts from physics, astrophysics, mathematics, AI, and neuroscience, to build foundational models that could be applied to a wide range of scientific problems. I'm curious to see how scientists will tailor concepts from the transformer architecture model. What are the analogies to predicting the next word, and to abstractions such as language, grammar, embeddings, and context? For example, a collaboration between astronomers and computer scientists are exploring planetary linguistics to determine whether planetary systems fall into natural categories following grammatical rules. And then while I spoke about big data and big compute, for many reasons, including access to data and compute and enormous energy usage to build current AI models, the AI research community, especially in academia, is pursuing what can be done with small data and small compute. Can we get similar functionality with less, perhaps through cleverer algorithms? Moreover, in some scientific domains, we may not even have an abundance of data. And then I'm also very excited to see the AI community interested in combining symbolic models of the past with statistical models of today. And then a different hybrid approach in science is to combine machine learning with physics-based models, for example, for simulations. There are some challenges, the first of which is actually having enough data. We can take advantage of the creativity of generative AI to generate data, but any synthetic data we generate has to be scientifically valid. We rightly accuse current generative AI systems with hallucinating. or making up fake facts? How do we both exploit and restrain that creativity for science? And finally, AI raises a new challenge to ensuring scientific integrity. To address this challenge, we need not just to educate scientists to check the accuracy of AI outputs, but also to do more research on trustworthy AI. And there are 2 articles there, shameless plug, on which I'm an author or co-author. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeanette. That was excellent. So I should have said we have a panel discussion at 10. So if you have any questions for Jeanette, please store them until 10. I will now invite Frank to give his talk.
Thank you. Here we go. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to speak here. And I will go into some depth what AI can do for the molecular sciences, how it can maybe empower or improve our research on molecular sciences. And let me go to a few very concrete examples before maybe looking at the bigger picture. And one point where I think AI can really do a lot is actually achieving higher accuracy for problems where we have difficulty getting accurate solutions. And a prime example here is electronic structure or quantum chemistry. Now, that's a 100-year-old field, electronic structure, so only the hard problems are left by now. So there are excellent methods that are widely used, like DFT and coupled cluster, etc. But there's still this realm of basically strongly correlated systems for which we have no universal reliable solver, right? So there's a zoo of methods, and they work sometimes and sometimes not. But the trouble here really is when we want to solve the Schrödinger equation to get the states, the electronic states of matter or molecules in the form of the wave function phi and the energy, which tells us the stability of the molecule E. This is an eigenvalue problem, so it doesn't look too bad, but it comes with a very nasty constraint, that is the exchange antisymmetry of electrons. So when you exchange 2 same spin electrons, basically the sign of the wave function switches. And this is fundamentally introducing a combinatorial argument, and that carries over to an exponential scaling of the exact methods. And this is why essentially our methods struggle in this limit. And so what we're doing here is basically to reformulate this problem as a variational problem. So we rewrite it as a machine learning problem, if you will, where we minimize the variational energy, and we use a neural network, a deep neural network, to represent the wave function. And this is an excellent use of machine learning because this is something that's really, really hard to model. It's a kind of a many-body problem. We need to understand and model many-body interactions, and it's very hard to come up by sort of thinking about the problem. So this naturally leads into a well-known physics algorithm. It's called variational Monte Carlo, where we're basically sampling the value of this energy that we're minimizing, and this basically directly translates to sampling the mini batches in a neural network. So there's a natural fusion of machine learning and physics. And so here's our first architecture that we proposed in 2020. It's by now ancient, right? 5 years in artificial intelligence. That's like looking back to the Stone Age. So now we use, of course, transformer architectures, etc. This came out the same week, basically, like DeepMind's architecture, Ferminet. This is PauliNet. And so just for comparison, you don't need to actually look very far to get these really hard quantum chemistry problems. Something as simple as the nitrogen dimer, where you're breaking a triple bond, you get some of these strongly correlated states as you break the bond. And if you just compare a bunch of different quantum chemistry methods, you get wildly different results. And you get kind of good results for the very expensive ones and bad for the cheap ones. And then sometimes you're lucky, but that's not really reliable. Deep quantum Monte Carlo can give you solutions for problems like these very reliably. And it's actually very easy to use by now. I mean, it took a few years to get us there. And we can get to systems with like 100, 150 electrons and get super high accuracy. at still what it seems like n cubed scaling with a huge prefactor. So lots of work to do to make that actually fast enough so that it's really usable in a wider scale. But we believe this method has the potential to be sort of a universal solver for these really hard problems, at least up to certain sizes where we actually want to have this kind of accuracy. But now let's talk about speed. In many scientific problems, for example, in discovery, we want to be able to do many calculations and search, for example, a chemical space of molecules and materials. And so we don't want to actually solve the ab initio problem every single time, but we want to train an emulator. So that's what we call basically a machine learning substitute for the simulator. And a prime example for that are force fields, because they have been actually around for 10, 15 years, machine learned force fields, I shall say, classical force fields much longer. And basically this so-called energy that we have this electronic energy, I've pointed out as an eigenvalue in the first slide, is now a function of the coordinates and of the molecule that we want to compute it for, and we learn it with the machine learning model. And here's one model from my colleagues at Microsoft. It's called MetaSim. It's a transformer model that basically is trained on a wide range of materials from many different elements. So this is following a trend where these models become from rather specialized, they go to more and more generalist and universal force fields. And basically it's an energy function, so the gradient of it is a force, so that's why it's called a force field. We can do things like structure optimizations and then do a vibrational analysis, compute the phonons, these are the lattice vibrations. We can do molecular dynamics with it and compute phase diagrams. And because this method is much, much faster than actually solving the ab initio problem, DFT or coupled cluster or whatever you will, at every step, you can compute various interesting properties from materials relatively rapidly, such as free energies, for example. And you can use the method to seek for new stable materials. And my colleagues found a few stable materials that are below the thus far so-called convex hull. So that's sort of the Pareto front of the most stable materials at a given mixture of elements. And so the fact that these methods are like a factor 1,000 or even more faster than DFT, that's really unlocking new science. So I think even though this is a relatively established branch of AI for science, there is so much new science you can just do by already leveraging the technologies we have now and actually really find new materials, new drugs, new catalysts, whatever. So even if we stop developing right now, you could easily keep 1,000 scientists busy for 10 years just finding new stuff with this technology. This like 1,000x just unlocks so much more capabilities. Next scale, sampling. So force fields are by far too slow for doing many things on the next higher scale. This is a biomolecule, a protein, and as you can see, it's very flexible. This is from a very extensive molecular dynamic simulations. And on the left, you see basically an illustration of different states the molecule can be in and switch between. And you see a timer here that's counting milliseconds. When we do molecular dynamic simulations, we integrate on femtoseconds. So it's many orders of magnitude. And actually, when we want to compute the properties of molecules, usually we're interested in expectation values over this ensemble, over this dynamic ensemble. Right, so for computing something like a binding affinity or the stability of a protein or something like that, we should actually average over all of this stuff. And that's unfortunately very hard. So even computing the binding event of two small proteins, which takes maybe 50 microseconds of real time in a small simulation box, would correspond to about a GPU year in a classical force field simulation. So that's the fast one. With a machine learned force fields would be a factor of 100 slower. But if you want to dissociate this complex, it would be an hour of real time or 1,000,000 GPU years, and just for this one single number. So that's obviously untractable. And this basically is the so-called sampling problem of molecular simulation. And I want to argue this is basically a 70-year-old problem, because ever since Metropolis we have this sort of problem and we still have it today. And in my opinion, this is
the most important unsolved problem in biomolecular simulation, at least. So practically every study is really limited by the sampling problem. So we've proposed using generative models for this problem back in 2018, and then 2019 we've proposed a Boltzmann generator. So this was before diffusion models came of age, and here we proposed using a so-called normalizing flow. That is a special neural network architecture which is invertible, and because it's invertible, it allows us to transform between random variables in such a way that when we sample from the neural network, we can compute the probability density of generating this sample, and that allows us to teach the neural network to generate a distribution that is similar to the equilibrium distribution that we want to sample from. And then use statistical mechanics in addition to that to bridge the difference between the two, sort of metropolis acceptance, for example, or importance sampling. And with this approach, we can go to sort of 1,000 atom systems and really sample them uncorrelated in one shot. So we don't have to wait for this very long simulation time to cross the energy barriers of the system. But normalizing flows is, again, it's kind of ancient nowadays, and they are much more scalable architectures. So today's state-of-the-art technologies in generative models are diffusion models, as was already mentioned. The idea is to take a data distribution, to prepare a data distribution, and then teach the model to learn this distribution and also learn to sample from it. And the concept here is we take unperturbed images or molecular structures, and we add noise to them, and then we learn the denoising distribution. And this, interestingly, is very much like learning a force field. Basically, we learn a force field which moves our noisy atoms around until we create a nice 3D structure. And this is also the concept of the structure module in AlphaFold 3 that we will hear about today. And in this distributional graphormer work, basically we used a graph transformer, leveraging actually the AlphaFold 2 embeddings, and also training on PDB and on MD simulations. And then using this technology, we could predict distinct conformations of proteins that are in the PDB and we haven't trained on. So we believe this is maybe pointing us to a way where we can think of solving the sampling problem and eventually substituting MD. And the last remark is another sampling problem is that in chemical spaces. So as already was mentioned in materials discovery and drug discovery, we have these huge combinatorial spaces of different molecules, different elements, etc., to search over that we cannot enumerate. So it's very handy to have a generative model that can generate distributions in the space that allow us to screen the space and then prioritize it, maybe get leads to further optimize them later. And this is also work from some of my colleagues at Microsoft, MetaGen, and this is basically a diffusion model in inorganic material space. So it's been trained on lots of material crystal structures, and it generates not only the geometry but also the element type during the diffusion process. And so on top you see unconditional sampling, but what's much more interesting is actually conditional sampling conditioned on certain properties. So for example, you want to condition on a material that has high magnetic density or obeys a specific chemistry and so on. And then, for example, you can produce materials with certain target symmetries or specific chemistries, like the convex hull of this particular mixture of elements, or target properties such as magnetic densities or band gaps. And so we believe these techniques could be one very useful tool for doing molecular discovery or materials discovery. So let me step back and just talk about a few paradigms of science that I think AI can really make a contribution to. So the traditional three paradigms of science are sort of as follows. So first there's observation and experiment. And then the formulation of a theory that explains this observation, which we can then submit back to an experiment to challenge this theory. And in the second half of the last century, we basically added numerical simulations to this mix. So now we can start basically solving theories that are in systems and in boundary conditions that are too complicated to do it on paper. And we can do these very complex density functional theory or Navier-Stokes solutions in the computer, which really are a backbone of the quantitative sciences today. But again, this uses the theory, it uses what's known from observation and experiment, and it produces hypotheses that can again then be tested by experiment. And a fourth paradigm of science, and this is of course arguable if this is really a paradigm, but I think many people share this vision, is that at some point we got these really huge scale data producers, such as, for example, the CERN, the Atlas experiment at the CERN, for example, or the Human Genome Project, where we basically build on all of these above. We do experiments and observations, we leverage theory, we leverage simulations, but we produce basically something like terabytes of data per second in the CERN, and we need very advanced data processing systems and algorithms to sift through and to be able to go back to the other levels. And we argue that basically this AI, these AI systems for the sciences could be something like a fifth paradigm, like an integrative paradigm. So we can replace simulators by something like emulators, by AI systems that behave like the simulator but could be much faster. Or we can empower the simulators to do better, to be more accurate. We can integrate a lot of data from different modalities, from different sources, into something like a foundation model and then reason over it. But at the end of the day, we always have to play with these other levels. We have to be able to generate hypotheses that are falsifiable in order to actually do real and testable science and to be ultimately truth-seeking in some good scientific practice. And with that, I want to end here and thank you for your attention and thank my colleagues at MSR.
Thank you, Frank. I'm sure that will provoke a number of questions. So our next speaker is Pushmeet, who I'm happy to say is here. And Pushmeet, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dr. Andy. I just discovered the joys of London traffic today, but reached in time. So I'll be sort of talking about what is that we are seeing in the use of AI in the application on science. So I lead the science team at DeepMind. We started this team around 6 or 7 years back, with the idea that AI is going to be a very powerful tool, and the best application for it is in discovering something new about the world that we live in and to advance science. So I work for this company, Google DeepMind, which has a simple statement and mission statement: build AI responsibly to benefit humanity. And the benefit humanity part is what the science part really resonates with and tries to accomplish. So as Frank sort of mentioned, there are these 5 paradigms that people are sort of talking about. And from the perspective of the type of topics that we see, I see that there is a growing need for machine learning and AI sort of techniques. And why is that the case? There are a few different trends. One trend is the scale of experimental data. As sort of Frank also mentioned, the amount of data that we are gathering about so many different fields, whether it's high energy physics or it's genomics or structural biology, is just immense. It's the days of a scientist sort of carefully going through that table of data are long gone. Right, the scale of data is, we are in a different sort of paradigm in terms of the scale of data that we are gathering about the world. The second sort of element is the complexity of the models, right? They are really exercising our ability to simulate those models and to run forward those models to see what behaviors and phenomena emerges from those simulations. And so that's also exercising, like that's also sort of limiting our understanding, and that's where I feel AI can play a big role as well. Now, at DeepMind, when we started the science program, we wanted to work on problems that we were uniquely suited to. And the way sort of we were looking at the scientific area, like the scientific field is extremely broad. So we had to sort of think about what we focus on and how we work on it. So in terms of what we focus on, we thought there are three sort of broad categories that we look for. One is that the problem is sort of worthy enough and it's hard enough, and it would have a transformative impact and would have a lot of downstream impact. So quantum chemistry and in structural biology, protein folding are two examples of these types of problems that if you somehow solve these problems, they have so much downstream impact in terms of the applications that they unlock. So that was one of the sort of key parts to doing the problem selection. The second sort of part was, of course, AI and machine learning does not sort of happen in a vacuum. The raw materials for that is experience or data. And that data could come from experimental labs or it could come from simulators. So availability of those data sets was crucial in our ability to sort of select these problems. And finally, there was a sort of good progress metric that we could all sort of use to sort of see whether we are making progress in that problem. And thankfully, the community, the scientific community, especially in structural biology for problems like protein folding, had done an exceptional job in both the data as well as the evaluation by their work on curating data sets over the last many decades in the PDB and running assessment programs like the Critical Assessment for Structure Prediction, CASP, which really sort of gave us a very good signal as to how much progress the field is making or needs to make. And then, so this was about the what. And then the how was, our approach was, if we are to look at these problems, we will approach them in a completely multidisciplinary way. We don't believe that AI is the hammer that you just come into the room one day and say, I've solved it. It doesn't work like that. All the projects that we have worked on required deep expertise in the domain and to integrate those sort of insights into the design of the neural network, into the design of the loss functions, and so on. And like a couple of sort of case studies that I'll just mention, and John and Remy are going to talk about it in detail, will show that these required a lot of insight to make these things work. So we started with AI for biology, and John is going to talk about AlphaFold, but I just wanted to, I can't give this talk without mentioning AlphaFold, so I'll just give you a quick sort of introduction. So it's about proteins. Proteins are the building blocks of life. They are a long molecule of amino acids, and the problem is, given this long sequence of 20 amino acids, you want to figure out the structure. And that's an extremely hard problem. Christian Affinson in 1972 got the Nobel Prize for this idea that you can actually make the prediction of the 3D structure from the sequence itself. And that was a remarkable sort of insight. And as I mentioned, there has been a lot of work over the last sort of many years on making progress on this with many different institutes across the world, aided by CASP, which has been a critical sort of evaluation protocol. So 2018 was the first time we sort of joined and entered the critical assessment. And the rate of progress, which John will tell you the story about, was was incredible, right? And it not only sort of surprised us that we had this hypothesis that AI will have this impact, but to show it gave us a lot of confidence that we should be taking this approach across different scientific disciplines. So just to sort of talk about that thesis that we started with, that if you work on these fundamental problems, they will have amazing transformative impact. AlphaFold today has been used by 1.8 million users. Now that statistic, it just shocks me. The fact that there are 1.8 million people using a scientific tool, if that is not a positive statement about the state of the world, then I don't know what is. So in this whole sort of news of gloom, of wars and so on, there are 1.8 million people looking at protein structures. Right? That is something we should be incredibly sort of proud of. And in terms of applications, it has sort of been used across the board, from enzymes for plastic decomposition to studying antibiotic resistance and so on. So again, that whole thesis that there is this fundamental problem that can unlock a large number of applications was really born through, and John is going to talk about it in more detail. So. But I just wanted to say that the problem does not stop there. Right? We didn't stop there. I think there's a lot more that needs to be sort of done at the gene level, at the cell level, at the organism level, and at each phase, the problem becomes harder and harder. Right? These are more sort of complex systems. In functional genomics, the prediction problem changes. Now you want to go from sequence to molecular phenotype, accurately predict the effect of arbitrary mutations on the gene expression. In the cell space, you want to understand the logic of cells, like what is the program that cells run. And then you want to go from molecular phenotype to cellular phenotypes. And at the organism sort of level, you want to understand disease, and you want to go from sequence and cell phenotype to the organism sort of phenotype. To just give you some examples of the work that we have done in this space, like our genome is like a recipe book. It has this coding part which says which proteins sort of make us all, and then there's a non-coding part which describe expression, and there are problems on both parts, right? And on the coding part, we want to understand what is the protein function, how do variations influence protein function, which are encoded in the coding part, and in the non-coding part, we want to understand how does changes influence protein expression. So we have done work on both of these sort of topics, and again, just to give you an example of how this sort of worked. The fundamental tool that we built, the fundamental architecture that we worked on for many years, AlphaFold, we could use and fine tune it to make this prediction to make a variant effect prediction. And if you just to give you the scale of the problem, there are 71 million possible missense variants, and only a very small fraction. First of all, like only 4 million are sort of observed, and a very small fraction, only 2% are clinically annotated, that whether they are benign or pathogenic. And what alpha missense could do is basically just go beyond, like just essentially cover this whole sort of pie to say what is likely benign, what is likely pathogenic. And we are seeing, I cannot go into the detail of some of the clinical applications for patient confidentiality, but we are a month after we actually launched the tool, we were seeing clinicians coming to us saying we used the tool to make a diagnosis and start a treatment. So the impact of this work is almost sort of immediate. Now I wanted to sort of go to a completely different sort of field to give you an example of the breadth of impact of this work. Another sort of fundamental problem of matrix multiplication. Again, it's a root node problem, has implications from computer graphics, scientific simulations, or neural network training itself. And it's a very simple problem. You want to figure out how to multiply matrices, and they have cubic complexity. It's a very simple sort of thing that we learn in school. But amazingly, Strassen in the 1970s came up with this amazing insight that you could reduce the number of multiplications. And like it was amazingly sort of it was amazing that someone could come up with this exercise, and can we sort of replicate that over the last sort of many decades. A lot of scientists have tried to do this, but they have got stuck in terms of what is practically possible. We again sort of looked at this problem as a fundamental problem, came up with a game that describes this sort of problem, and I don't have much time. So I'll just say that essentially the game works as a tensor factorization game. You have this matrix multiplication tensor, and you're trying to play this game to find the factors. And alpha tensor came up with this factorization, which just went beyond what was known in theoretical computer science. So a completely new algorithm which could sort of really sort of go beyond the worst case complexity bounds that were known for matrix multiplication. Now, we have since then made it more general. Now we are not only searching in that algorithmic space, we are searching in a program space, and we have looked at the cap set problem, which is another sort of very interesting mathematical problem, which Terence Tao says is one of his favorite. It's like finding independent set in a structured graph. And the fun search algorithm, which uses the LLM as an inner loop, was able to discover new things. So in this case, the LLM hallucination actually are useful. They come up with something that we didn't think was correct, but it was in fact correct when you actually check it. We have applied it to more practical things like online bin packing problems, which have a lot of commercial and scientific sort of applications. How much time do I have, Andy?
4 minutes.
Okay, so that's great. So just to give you a snapshot of what are the other things that are happening. So I mentioned structural biology, I mentioned genomics, I mentioned a number of biological problems, I mentioned the computer science sort of work, but the work doesn't end there. We have a lot of other initiatives that are going on within the team. One of sort of my favorite ones is the work that we did on fusion. One of the challenges that you see in a fusion reactor is how do you sort of make sure that you can control the plasma and keep it stable in a tokamak reactor. And so in collaboration with EPFL, we worked on a new policy for controlling the magnetic field. So these fields, these policies have been hand designed and handcrafted over many decades. And they're very sort of tricky to sort of design because unlike experiments in other areas, the experiments in a tokamak, they run for sort of, they're very short experiments. They run for a second, and the statistic is that this tokamak in EPFL in Lausanne, when it runs, it actually uses the same amount of energy as the whole city of Lausanne for that period of time. So they can't run it all the time. And then the magnetic sort of field, the magnetic coils have to be controlled at 10 kilohertz. So extremely hard problem. You are very sensitive. You have to control the magnetic coils in a very specific sort of way. And of course, you need to think about all the safety issues that are involved in making sure that you don't go beyond the bounds and so on. So in this, we had limited data, but what we had was access to a very good simulator. So we trained a policy on many millions of rounds of simulations that we could do in simulation. Sort of a human designer would not be able to sort of do that, and then try to make sure that policy then generalizes into the real world. And with that policy, now we could not only recreate and stabilize the plasma in a conventional setting, but go for more exotic plasma configurations like the doublet here and elongated sort of shapes, which nucleus physicists are interested in sort of studying and finding the behavior of. And this was not possible earlier. In pure mathematics, we have taken machine learning and found new conjectures that were not known. An example of this is our work on topology, in which we had looked at knots. And knots in topology sort of have traditionally been sort of characterized by algebraic variants and geometric variants, but there was no connection known between these two characterization of a single knot. And we gave that problem to a neural network and said, here's a lot of data. Try to see if you can predict one characterization from the other. And we assumed that it will not be able to sort of find it because nothing was known about this area. But amazingly, it was able to find a connection. And then we worked with our collaborators, Geordie Williamson, who is a fellow of the Royal Society, and Mark Andrus and at Oxford, to distill that knowledge into a very simple and elegant conjecture that the mathematicians then were able to prove. So this is a machine learning AI system really adding to sort of mathematical knowledge. And the pace of innovation is not stopping. It's actually just accelerating. So this is just a snapshot of what came out of just our team in the last sort of few months of the year. So we had a materials sort of project called GNOME. This is a graphical sort of neural network which made predictions about 380,000 new stable crystals for material discovery, expanding what was known of stable materials by a factor of 10. So there's a sort of materials project which contains stable materials. It has around 40,000 stable materials. It was expanded to 400,000. By this approach. We had GraphCast, which Remy is going to talk about, which can make more accurate predictions than the simulators that current meteorological offices are using. So they are relying on supercomputers and they run those simulations for days. GraphCast can make a more accurate prediction in a minute on a single GPU. So the scale of advancement is just sort of exceptional. And then we had work on alpha geometry, which showed that these models are now able to solve IMO level geometry problems. And of course, fun search I mentioned. So, and with sort of the rise of LLMs, there is another new ability sort of that is coming up. Till now, most of our models are trained on structured data sets. But with LLMs now, we have the chance to also leverage unstructured knowledge, which is embedded in all the scientific publications that have been sort of found in the scientific literature. And what we showed is that you can use LLMs to not only sort of extract this information, but really augment the new scientific study. So in this particular case study, we took a paper that had been was a review paper which collected a lot of scientific insights about what happens because of certain variants in genomics, and we extended that by Gemini reading 200,000 papers, finding out the relevant papers, then extracting the relevant sort of effects in those papers and adding them to the database. So now what required a large collection of graduate students working carefully on these data sets can be done by an LLM. I mean, of course, we had to go and do due diligence on making sure that the extracted results were correct and so on, but we showed that it was, in fact, possible to do this. So wrapping up, I think machine learning and AI techniques are an incredible sort of tool to address the problems and the challenges that we are seeing in science today. And we are at the start of a very exciting time where these techniques are going to advance scientific research in quite a significant way. So I'll conclude by that. Thank you.
Thank you, Pushmeet. That was great. I'll ask Tom Mitchell to give the final talk in the session.
Well, my name is Tom Mitchell. It's a delight to be here in this fascinating collection of discussions about AI and science. We've heard a lot about physical science, mathematical science. I want to talk a little bit about what you might call a behavioral science, which is the science of human learning. Well, what is the science of human learning? Well, it's a field that's been around for decades, and the goal of this field is to understand what are the principles that underlie how humans learn. And obviously, the importance of this science is that if we understood that, we could presumably do a better job of educating people. What are the kinds of results that this field has come up with so far? Results like this. Spaced practice improves long-term retention. What that means, for example, is that if you are learning a language and you have to learn all the new words, you're better off spending 5 minutes a day for 30 days than you are spending 150 minutes today. You will remember more if you spread that out over the next 30 days. So that's a principle that was uncovered through a variety of behavioral studies, usually small scale, dozens of students, or if you're lucky, hundreds of students. And a second example of a result is that active learning, that is getting students involved in discussions, group problem solving, also improves learning. So these are the kind of results that we have. I would have to be honest and say progress has been modest. You can tell that from the fact that the education system has not been revolutionized by these. But what I want to do today is convince you that maybe times could change. In particular, because of AI and because of the fact that we now have very large-scale online learning educational environments, we have an opportunity to do this kind of research at dramatically larger scale and with much more intelligent software behind it. So I want to show you some examples of what I mean by that. When I say that we have much larger online education systems today, what I mean is that we have systems, probably a dozen systems around the world, that, like this one from China, this is from a company called Squirrel AI, provides online educational materials for kindergarten through 12th grade students. And what you see here is just a fragment of the log data from one student who spent 1 hour, 49 minutes going through a lesson. And each of these lines tells something that the student did. At the beginning, they go through a pre-test. Those lines are telling you which question they were asked, how long it took them to answer it, whether they got it right or wrong, if they got it wrong, which answer did they give, etc. Later, they watch a video, they solve some practice problems. You get the idea. Very detailed keystroke level data on the trajectory of students going through a curriculum. So what can we do with this kind of data? If you think about it, there are two fundamental questions when we want to teach somebody. One is the diagnosis question. What is their current knowledge state? And the second is the therapy question. What should we do about that knowledge state? How can we treat them with the next educational intervention? So with this kind of data, let's take a look at the diagnosis problem. We can use these kinds of log data of student histories to predict, as the students in the middle of the curriculum, what do they currently understand and not? And we'll frame that as which questions, if we were to ask them now, would they answer correctly or incorrectly? If we could do that, if we could model students in that way, we'd have a good operational definition of their current knowledge state. So we can use machine learning algorithms together with this kind of data, literally to learn models that predict the probability that a student will correctly answer question K, conditioned on what we've seen them do so far in their log data. If you try this, here are the results. Each column here is one of 4 different large-scale online education systems. They're all providing us with tens of millions of log data entries. And the numbers here reflect how accurately we can predict which question the student will get right and wrong. Specifically, the test here is we give the system 2 questions, one of which the student did answer correctly, one of which they did not. We give the system the student history up to but not including the time when those questions were asked. And we have it tell us which one did they get right versus wrong. So if you guess at random, you'll get 50% of these correct. If you simply look at what other students did on those questions, and some questions are inherently more difficult, they will have higher error rates than other questions. If you just look at that data, not at this particular student, then you can do better than chance. You can about 70% of the time tell which question, because it was harder for other students, will be harder for this student. But if you pay attention to the history of the student and use our trained models, then we can get, on average, around 80% accuracy in telling which of 2 questions that the student has not yet been asked they're going to get right versus wrong. So 8 times out of 10, that's roughly the state of the art here. So this data is very valuable for training those kinds of models. That's the diagnosis problem, diagnosing what students understand. What about the therapy problem of choosing what to do about it? Here, one example which is based on a collaboration we did with a nonprofit company in the US called CK12, which again provides kindergarten through 12th grade materials. We looked at the question of, can we learn which hint to give to a student if they've answered a question incorrectly, but before they tried a second time? And again, the log data gives us plenty of examples of students missing a question, getting some hint, and then answering it correctly or incorrectly, plus gives us downstream information about how well they did at the end of the lesson in terms of all of the knowledge for this lesson. So here we see on the left a question that says, it's a biology question, integral monatomic proteins are permanently attached to the membrane from what? And here are 4 choices. Here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hints that could be given when the student gets that wrong. You can decide for yourself which of those you think is the best hint, the most effective. But we know the answer because we ran data collection where we would provide these hints uniformly at random to students. We did this for over 1,000 biology questions and collected millions of examples of students missing the question, getting a hint, and then seeing what happened. So I can tell you in this case, hint number 1 is the best hint. The prefix mono means single or alone. Empirically, that's the most effective hint. Okay. This was deployed in 2023, and now there have been millions of hints assigned by this learned strategy that as the system's in routine use. So this system now has the property that the more it teaches, the better it teaches, because as it's doing, it's collecting more data, learning more of these kinds of hints. All right, the second and final thing I want to mention is, what about large language models? So what I showed you here is really based on big data statistical learning, which has been around for 10 years, which makes it sort of prehistoric in this crowd. What about large language models? Can they, for example, successfully predict which hint will work best, or even generate better hints? So we looked at the first of these questions. We gave GPT-4 a question and 2 hints, and we asked it to tell us which hint would work better. Again, if it guessed a chance, it would be 50%. It was a little better than that, 60 to 65%. But then this led us to consider the question, can we train it to do better than that? After all, we have all this log data. We know ground truth for many hints. Can we use that as a set of labeled training data to teach the language model to choose hints more appropriately? So here's the algorithm we came up with. I'll show it in a couple of slides. But the input to the system, again, is a question and 2 possible hints. You see that at the top here. In this case, the question is the transfer of energy from a vibrating object in waves that travel through matter is called fill in the blank. The language model prediction in this case is that hint 2 will be the better of the 2 hints. You see the 2 hints there. The first one says, in science, sound is defined as the transfer of energy, etc. And the second hint simply says, energy, the ability to do work. These were human-authored hints. So the language model predicts hint 2 will work best. In fact, we know hint 1 did work better than hint 2. And so the next step, we have a second language model, which we'll call the critic agent. It gets to look at all the stuff on the top half of the slide, and its job is to critique the performance of the predictor agent. And so it says the teacher's prediction was incorrect. In this case, the more helpful hint was hint 1, and then it goes on. And this boldface is interesting. It says, a general principle to keep in mind for future predictions is that providing concrete examples and explanations related to the concept being asked about is often more helpful than providing it. You can read it too. Okay, so it has been instructed to critique the agent and, where possible, to suggest more general principles that are covered by this example. Okay, so now what? Well, here's processing of a typical example, but we have many examples. So we gave, after 125 of these kind of examples, each which received a critique, we asked a third language model agent to take those 125 critiques and distill them into a concise set of principles, a concise rubric that would describe what makes a good hint. Here's what it came up with. I'm abbreviating. It had 7 points in its list. But for example, let's just read the first one. Context and completeness over conciseness. Or connection to practical applications, comprehensive understanding. So these are the principles that these 3 language model agents working as a team, but guided by ground truth labeled data from testing these hints on students, came up with. By the way, I'll tell you that we tried lying to the second agent about which hint was best. And it was perfectly able to come up with an explanation when we told it the wrong answer. As can people, it was perfectly able to come up with a hypothesis, an explanation of why, when we lied to it, that was obviously the correct thing to do. But the thing is, it's being guided now by ground truth from these experiments. So, is this rubric any good? We gave it back to the first agent, the one that had to make the predictions, and we reran it on the same examples. The accuracy changed from 67% to 84%. And on test data that we withheld, similar kinds of improvements. So there is some empirical validity to this rubric, this set of general principles that the system has come up with. And if you think about it, these principles are the kind of principles that human learning science is trying to develop over the year from empirical studies. It's just that now we're doing it with much larger data sets and we've got LLMs in the loop in the hypothesize and verification part of the process. Okay, so finally, let's see, how am I doing on time? Okay, we also looked at, can we use LLMs to generate hints? The short answer is yes, it's very good. If I give it a typical math problem you've all seen, Mary drives from point A to B at 60 miles an hour while Bill drives from B to A at 30. Where do they meet? It answers that correctly. But then if I say, suppose the student answers incorrectly that they meet halfway, then it suggests this hint. Remember, they're not driving the same speed, so they won't meet halfway. Think about who's driving faster and how that affects where they will meet. The faster driver will cover more distance. That's a good hint, I think. We haven't tested it on humans. But you can see that we can also use these systems to generate. By the way, just for fun, I asked it to rewrite the hint as a Taylor Swift song. The chorus is fantastic. You gotta focus on the distance they travel before they meet and their paths unravel. Mary's speed is faster, that's a fact. So halfway between A and B is not where they're at. Okay. So where does this leave us? I just want to suggest that we might be on the cusp of a big change due to large-scale data and AI. We could possibly see the evolution of online learning sites literally as living laboratories for human learning science, but not at a very abstract level of principles, but as a much more operational level of here are specific pieces of learned advice about which hint to use, how to construct new hints. We can learn to diagnose the student's knowledge state, to choose among a list of provided therapies. In that final part, you saw that we can also rely on LLMs to help us hypothesize and evaluate the principles that the science of human learning is trying to discover in order to improve education. And with LLMs, we can also imagine a system that's continuously generating content, both from LLMs and, of course, from human teachers who have ideas. But taken together, you can imagine a system that's as it's being used, is simply a continual process of generating new content, experimenting with it, seeing what works, and improving education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Could I ask the four speakers to come up to the stage? So we now have the question session. We're a small amount of time behind. I propose we kind of split that between the questions and the breakout session, but we're not far off. So this is an opportunity to ask speakers questions, and please direct them either to individual speakers or just to the panel, and we'll sort it out. So one at the front to begin. Please talk into the microphones as well, if you could. There are some microphones, I believe. Yep.
Thanks. I'm Peter Stone from the University of Texas and Sony AI. So fantastic opening session, everybody. So this is, I guess, for all of the panelists, but Pushmeet, you closed with saying that AI is a great tool for scientists to use, and that was sort of a theme of many of these talks. And I guess what I'm interested in is sort of there's the other perspective of human learning. Tom's talking with using it as a tool to improve human learning, but there's also the perspective of human learning as sort of the baby as scientist, like the child in the playpen making sense of all of the world, doing sort of hypothesis testing and experimentation and sort of learning a general causal model of the world. What do you think is the connection between sort of human scientists using AI as a tool and this sort of general AI scientist making sense of the world from the developmental robotics perspective, and what what you've done sort of applies to that second case?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. Sorry. I don't know. Okay, yeah. So I think that's a good question. I think particularly like when we look at the some of the projects in mathematics and computer science, that was I felt there was a lot of collaboration between the human scientists, the mathematicians, and the AI. So in the case of that topology example, starting off, nobody knew whether there's a connection exists. Data had to be sort of generated. So humans were involved in basically generating the data. It was a very sort of simple process in generating the data. The neural network figured out that prediction was possible. But how was this prediction possible? What were the features of one characterization that were somehow being able to predict the other characterization? So scientists distilled that and then and made the conjecture. So I think that was a very collaborative experience. It doesn't happen in all domains, but we are seeing it in fields where specifically a lot of science is about also communication, making sure that scientists understand how things are being modeled. One other sort of example I wanted to give was in the case of AlphaFold. When we launched AlphaFold, we thought it's a great tool for predicting structures. Very soon, I think a lot of science happens on Twitter these days. Very soon, somebody had used AlphaFold to make its uncertainty as a predictor for disorder. And this is something that we had not evaluated. It was not in the training set. It was nowhere in our whole pipeline. And somehow it just happened that the uncertainty that came from the AlphaFold predictions were a great predictor for disorder. And it just was something that was discovered by the scientific community playing with the tool and seeing what comes out. So it's difficult to predict these interactions and to model these interactions and to optimize for the eventual outcome, but they happen in many different sort of domains. So I don't know if I answered the question correctly, but I think there is a lot that there is on that second sort of paradigm, but systematically addressing it is going to be sort of challenging.
But this is still in some sense human in the loop this is still sort of human in the loop interaction where ideas and that I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
But I'm also asking about the sort of and the reason the human in the loop is necessary, one of the reasons, is that the models are not able to do the physical experimentation of like, what happens when I put the block on the other block and push it and things like that.
Yeah.
So I guess like, where can we get to the point it's not necessarily a goal to take the human fully out of the loop, but to give more of the autonomous experimentation and causal model building through experience as opposed to, the fixed data sets.
I see. I think so. In the case of the fusion example, it was completely, the model was just learning from the simulator. There was no humans were involved. I mean, humans were involved in the design of the simulator, right? But once the simulator was designed, everything was done by the policy. The policy trained what is the right magnetic field that needed to be sort of applied at what sort of rate and what should be the control system. So that was completely. The humans were designed the simulator, but the rest of the learning happened by using RL.
I suggest we move on. We have a question towards the back.
Oftentimes, really important discoveries happen in an unexpected way, and often, really important properties occur as a very rare event. So, what is the best strategy for learning outside of distribution, learning something singular and rare? Any ideas?
Keep humans in the loop.
Any other answer? That's a hard question, right? Any other answers?
I mean, maybe just the general answer is that the trend that we see with these large-scale machine learning models is that at larger scales, so a lot of data and a lot of parameters, they are kind of less prone to just smoothing out, and they kind of become better at predicting rare events. We've seen that, for example, in some of the latest weather models. But yeah, I think keeping the lumen in the loop, especially for science, is probably a good idea for a couple of years, I would say.
I guess one answer is embedding physical models that capture discontinuities like that,
Exactly.
but not all systems can be captured. I think you stumped the panel there. Stumped me. Other questions? Yes.
Is anybody studying whether the use of these models is causing people to be intellectually lazier? I mean, we ought to be looking at these models and thinking critically.
I can partially answer that. Me for sure, but the panel, anybody?
I think the models are like the amount of excitement in a field where machine learning has come in and has done something. I mean, you will see that there's a rapid increase in the number of publications, the amount of progress. So I think, on the contrary, I would think that people sort of see, the scientific community in specific areas see that there is a big change, and in fact, this is the opportunity to actually leverage that big change. So, like, I would say it's the complete opposite. Wherever AI and machine learning has been applied, the community has suddenly sort of, oh, well, something exciting is happening, let's investigate it properly. So I think there's a lot of intellectual curiosity as well as a lot of progress in specific areas of science where machine learning and AI has shown to sort of have promise.
I want to give a different example to address Maria's question. As she knows, I'm in an administrative role here, and I oversee a lot of staff who oversee a lot of processes. And what I have found is that staff have embraced ChatGPT and the like, in actually using this technology for their daily tasks in ways that are now freeing up their time, where they used to do something that would take hours or days, they do in minutes, and they're deliriously happy. And so they're now sharing their experiences with other staff, and it's kind of spreading. So this is about operational efficiency. And it's something that we didn't push on people, but we said, well, embrace this technology and see how you can use it in your daily routine. And people are doing that. So that's not science, but it's still operations.
So Jeanette, can I ask? I mean, that's a good point, but someone said to me, predicting the next most probable word is exactly what you don't want for disruptive science thinking, almost the reverse, actually. I mean, what do you think about that? Because I can certainly see the administrative bit, but what about in discovery? Do you see a role for LLMs?
Well, I think the whole today and all the other panelists are actually giving you very good examples of how scientific discovery can be made with traditional AI and then non-Stone Age modern AI, LLMs. And it's, for me, I think that is the most exciting for the science community, scientific discovery. And it's the examples that were given just by my colleagues are amazing. So they are all amazing. So I'm quite impressed.
We have a question right at the front. Yeah.
So it's a bit of a follow-up there, is that so a lot of the things that humanities have figured out and then discovered so far scientifically have been driven by the curiosity as well as essentially the coincidences or the accidents. But now as we replace a lot of what we do with this AI or many of the algorithms that often require some kind of reward function or the loss functions, are we actually losing out on a huge chunk of the potential future scientific discoveries that could have only been done based on the curiosity and the accident, because we are essentially removing a lot of the human curiosity or the accidents that are made, I don't know, maybe by the mistakes or just by random chance? Any one of you could answer.
Well, I actually have a related question for Tom. When I was listening to his talk, and he was talking about, we can break down learning into two phases. And I just remember, and this is going to sound a little computer sciencey, remembering how continuations work in programming languages and having an aha that I just don't know, do we lose that aha? And that it's similar to your question, there's a kind of the curiosity-driven science, there's usually an aha, and let me try this out, and it works, and then there's a feeling of, wow. So are we losing both the aha of how learning, when you figure out a hint for that student, it sounds very mechanical almost, and do we lose that thing that happens in the brain?
I think that, to think about that particular example.
How continuations work.
Well, right, or do we lose creativity in creating new hints, for example, just because we have good ways now of automatically deciding empirically which ones work better. I think that's just a signal that we do want to keep humans in the loop. And one of the very interesting things, at least about LLMs, is that they work in the world, in the representation of natural language, which is understandable to us and which is editable by us and in which we can contribute our own thoughts. And so I think one of the great questions about the next decade for me is to what degree will we see systems, well, first I'll say I believe most of the systems we're going to see will be combined human-computer discovery systems. There will be examples where computers do it alone, but I don't think that'll be the exception instead of the rule, I believe. But then on top of that is the question of to what degree will the communication between the person and the computer as they collaborate be in natural language versus in more finely tuned technical vocabularies of individual fields. And if you look at how professors interact with students, it's a blend of those two languages. In fact, part of what it means to learn chemistry is to learn the language of chemistry. And that's that whole idea, what will be the final language? How will we evolve it? How will we use it for sharing ideas? I think is one of the most interesting things to come.
Can I add something? So I think we should distinguish between different types of AI. So a lot of the methods we've been talking about here in this first sessions are sort of specialized tools like predict a protein structure or compute an energy or something like this. And there I think it's clear that there is something like a loss function, and having these tools can elevate us to do more complex tasks using these tools, right? And then there's this sort of this LLM world, which is sort of the reasoning and maybe planning world. And then there's the question, can we replace or can we use these tools to do scientific thinking and plan a scientific project, like do the entire drug discovery or materials discovery pipeline with all the data collection and validation and all that stuff, right? And I mean, it's kind of maybe not very smart of me to bet against the next version of what GPT can do or cannot do, but I feel we're still very far away from that. We have to learn to do scientific reasoning and integrate these numerical results and reason over them and find inconsistencies in the result and then follow up and figure out, oh, there's actually a problem with the measurement here. It's giving us consistently wrong results. So I would argue this sort of artificial scientific intelligence, ASI if you want, is kind of harder than what we call AGI and would probably take longer to achieve.
Just to sort of answer this question and also the previous question that came up on how do you make sure that the long tail, the out of distribution effects and so on. So I think the problem is not in the empirical risk minimization paradigm, or not in that we are following a loss function. It's how rich is that loss function. Like so if you look at scientists are also optimizing some loss function, sometimes a degenerate one when we sort of publish or perish. But there is intrinsic motivation. There are a lot of different things that go into what is the reward function. And the question that we should be asking is not whether we are following the loss function, it is whether the loss function is rich enough. Whether it's basically, it covers the broad things of explaining the world. If it has that rich sort of loss function where it says, I want to make I want to be able to explain all these out of distribution effects or really go after these extrapolation questions, then if the model succeeds in them, it will discover new theories while doing that optimization. So yes, there is a danger that we should not be overly focused on a very specific loss function. The loss function needs to be rich enough.
Okay, well, loath I am to close this. I think Ash will kill me if I don't stay to time. So I think we better stop there. Could we all thank the speakers for their talks? So the next part of this is the breakout session. So you have tables. The idea is to discuss what we've heard, or in fact you can discuss, here are the tables. You can discuss anything. I'm assuming the green is the nominated rapporteur, is that correct? Yes. So you can talk about anything. But a couple of questions to think about, perhaps for starters. Are there any missed opportunities for AI and science, and what does it mean for training the future generation of scientists? Are two questions you might want to think about, but you can talk about anything. Then we're going to reconvene at 10:50, and the rapporteur in green is going to give a very brief summary. We'll have... Ash, it's 10 minutes for 5, how many tables? 5 tables, so you have 2 minutes to summarise per table. Okay, so we have 10 minutes before coffee and 5 tables, so I suggest we simply go from table 1. We've got 2 minutes for your pearls of wisdom. Where is table 1? Table 1.
Hey everyone, so we had a fun discussion here at table 1. We spent a lot of time talking about medicine and kind of personalized medicine, and as we, I think this idea that what does this long tail look like of patients? Because that's something that maybe will be more addressable using AI systems, right? That like we might be able to find treatments for rarer diseases. How rare will these be? Can you run clinical trials for very rare diseases? Maybe that looks more like a trial of a whole system for solving a rare disease than a trial for a specific disease itself. And then also maybe concerns about as these systems become more integrated into treatment in medicine and in education, that the systems themselves are creating dynamics that are novel, maybe creating distributional shifts in the things that we're trying to study, in the things that we're trying to understand and treat. And can these systems like evolve to adapt to the changes that they're causing in the things that we're looking at? I think these are things we agreed are important questions or interesting questions. I think hopefully that kind of captures what we talked about. Thank you.
Great stuff. Well, we had an entirely different conversation on table 2, so...
So we started off talking about, I guess, the analogy of using calculators or spell check and thinking about that and kind of getting our wheels turning as to whether AI is just another tool that's something similar to that would have similar cultural impact or not. And then we quickly found that that was probably not a generally agreed upon theme, and in particular questions around correctness and whether the hallucinations were the key distinction of AI from something like a spell checker or a calculator, which is always right within a limited scope, this is a broader tool and not always right. And then what do you do about that? And so we talked a little bit about formal methods and proof checking, and then adversarial methods as something else, or red team, finding counterexamples. And that led us into a conversation about peer review and publications in general. So peer review, of course, is our traditional method, will probably be outpaced by the scale and scope of production, and also the intensity with which things can be hidden. So things that are incorrect but appear to be correct in context, because if they're produced by an LLM, that's where they tend to be. So that challenges a lot of our traditional checking. And so we talked a little bit about automated systems. And then if that's a risk, what are the other risks that go along with LLMs or AI broadly? And we talked about some things that were, potentially risks and potentially opportunities surrounding equity and, English as a foreign language, or using LLMs for translation, which might broaden the scope of scientific enterprise in a more multinational way than it has so far. We talked a little bit about whether the energy need is going to increase or decrease. And so whether we're going to have to build power stations all over the world with data centers next to them. And if so, who gets access to those data centers? And is that equitable along with the pollution that comes with the power production? And then finally, we had a long conversation, a very interesting conversation around training, using AI for training, and whether it's going to make all of our students very anxious because they're going to be expected to publish 10 times more than their advisors, who were 10 times more than their advisors, and so on, and how we handle that kind of growing anxiety within the scientific discipline.
Perfect, thank you. Table 3.
Okay, so we didn't get into this meta discussion of humans getting too worried about AI, but we did start off by asking the question of whether AI is advancing research, or if GPUs are just getting more powerful. And then we spent a while circling around that question. And then something that came up is we enjoyed one of the comments from one of the speakers today that if you lied to one of these large language models, that it would develop a new reason, a new world for this counterfactual situation, and that this is actually really good. It's able to generalize given data, which is a positive thing. We then spent quite some time talking about data curation, as inspired by one of our speakers, and talked first about the problem that was presented, where it was very specific for pulling out 3 pieces of information from those papers, and then discussed some of what would be required to extract an entire knowledge base. You're not just looking for 3 data points in each given paper, but you're actually trying to extract all of that knowledge and synthesize it and store it appropriately for future use, and that might require stacking of these models and LLMs, using different ones for different purposes in a stack. And then we had more discussion around this with including prompt optimization and other things. And then we ended up talking about both keeping the human in the loop and how important this is, as well as embedding equations and physics knowledge for discovery, and then ended up on the concept of interpretability, both how can you understand the result, and can you understand how the code came to that result? And these are places where there's a lot of room for continued growth. So thank you.
Super. Almost no overlap at all so far. Table 4.
So, at this table, I will summarize essentially the most important motive was understanding at different levels. So one of the things was, if you get even if you get an explanation of why an LLM comes up with something that is not equivalent to understanding mechanisms of, say, an underlying physical system or some kind of simplification. And essentially what we talked about were variations of this theme. Essentially, these machines can do a lot of analysis, but the problem is how much can we actually follow the details? And one example that was brought up, well, if you use a laptop, you also can't follow the details. And the discussion was, in principle, however, you can, for example, deduce what it's doing. With an LLM, that's not obvious. So this was a little bit of discussion whether this is equivalent or not. But essentially, it means essentially traceability. Can you trace what you're trying to do, what you're trying to ask an LLM to what it's actually doing? And can you follow back the line of argument? I will basically interpret that as, do we have an understanding what it's doing? And on the other way, in the other direction is, when you ask an LLM to do things like programming, programming looks like something you could in principle trace back, but of course when students use it and they don't care about knowing how to program themselves, to which extent do they know what they're doing? And so essentially, to sum up, do we actually know what we are getting when we have an LLM solving our task? And I do think that this looks like a major challenge for the coming decade.
Marvelous, thank you. Table 5.
Thanks. So I'm substituting for Cecilia Lindgren, who was supposed to lead this table but couldn't be here today. I think our table was willing to right away stipulate that this is a fundamentally different suite of tools for doing science, and it's just amazing. And I think we were also willing to stipulate that there are a lot of applications that are taking the drudgery out of science, and that's going to be a good thing. Science now, someone at our table said, is a very inefficient undertaking, and it can be made more efficient. So stipulating all of that, we spent most of our time on the kind of question, a bit like interpretability, what I'll come back to. What are we going to lose and what are we going to gain? Because we're going to use our brains differently, we all thought. And this isn't the first time that advances in computing have made scientists use their brains differently. There was a bit of discussion of when large physical codes first came in. People had to learn what should they trust in a code simulation, what should they not trust. What does interpretability mean there also? Someone mentioned we have in this room Frances Arnold, who does beautiful experiments in directed evolution. And there she is. And Frances, we were going to ask you, when directed evolution gives you a result, would you call that satisfies the needs of explainability and interpretability, or is it just is? Definitely not. Yes, and somehow you've been much honored for not explaining the. So I won't go on too much other than to say that I think our table, it ended up being quite a complicated question. What are the pros and cons of explainability? What do we mean by that? And how are we going to think differently in this new world?
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. That was fascinating. We're almost exactly on time, 1 minute behind. I'd like to close the session. We now have 15 minutes for coffee. Thank you, everyone.